r/AskReddit. Ex-prisoners of Reddit. Is prison represented in movies/TV shows accurately? Mind-numbing monotony. Most officers just want to do their shift and go home without having or making issues. Fights are generally rare. Location. Situational dependent. Rape isn't nearly as common as you get led to believe, and nobody goes up and fights the biggest guy to get respect. It wouldn't get you any respect anyhow. Most inmates just want to do their time in peace. Boring. Every day just like the last. There were fights, but they weren't what you see in 3 movies. Don't disrespect people inside, and you won't get beaten up outside. You really should get a serious tag for this one. I'm an attorney. I don't do criminal law, but I was part of a coalition to remedy disability access in jails and prisons. I've been in all sorts of facilities, county jails, state prisons, small town holding cells, and state forensic, for instance mental facilities. We got a really unfiltered look at how a lot of these facilities were being run. Here's what I can tell you. Fuck going to jail. It's boring. I mean, incredibly monotonous and boring. It's cramped, concrete and unwelcoming. The food is trash, the commissary is incredibly expensive, and most of the time you're sitting around just trying to figure out how to kill time. What I didn't see were any fights or combative inmates. Problematic inmates are usually pulled quickly into segregation. In prisons, most inmates were well adjusted to the new norm and just followed the routine. A lot of the inmates we encountered were relatively sedated. Most were relatively friendly, albeit guarded since we were unfamiliar and in their home. The forensic unit's mental health was the most disturbing, not because of gross abuses, but because you're stuck in there with nothing but other heavily sedated crazy people. At least if you're in a general pop environment you would be able to keep a normal conversation. The food ranged from not bad to not great. Some meals were comparable to what I got in school, and I'd have no qualms about eating it. It's something that gets me when people get up in arms about prison labor. If you paid comparable minimum wage there'd be no reason to contract with prisons. But fuck me, if I was an inmate I'd see jail work as at least some break from the monotony. It's very routine every day, you pretty much know what to expect. The food is generally pretty bad, but if you are lucky and have some money put on your books you can get a visit from the commissary ferry and load up on snacks. Also the commissary is used as a form of currency. Ramen is a big ticket item in my area. Generally there is no rape in the shower room. Fights will occur there though due to no guard in the room. You play a lot of cards, handball, basketball etc. on rec. The guards typically are pretty relaxed and not on a power trip. They just want to get their shift over and done with. The majority of inmates are pretty chill and don't want or like any drama on the block. Toilet wine does exist. Contraband will find its way inside. Do not call any inmate a bitch. That's a huge mistake. And don't linger on someone's porch in front of one's cell is known as the porch. Hollywood as a whole has it all wrong and glorifies all that doesn't typically happen. No, mostly because every prison show focuses on the worst of the worst, and not the low-level camps full of chronic fuck-ups and low-level morons, which are way more common. My 3rd day at my processing camp, I'd just gotten into the volleyball game, way too white and fat for basketball. Rained hard the day before. At one point I ran to get the ball, before it floated into the gigantic, muddy puddle next to the court. Mistake. Fell on my ass and got mud up and down my threads. 1 of 3 for the week. Half the yard is laughing their ass off. By the end of rec though, half the guys playing were sliding across this puddle like it was a fucking slip and slide. One of the most surreal moments of my life. I was scared shitless of being incarcerated less than a week before, and now I was watching a bunch of criminals slide around a prison yard like they were back in elementary school. Really opens your eyes that a lot of these guys might not be perfect people, but most of them aren't terrible either. Never been to prison, but my brother has done a ton of jail time and did a 3-year stint in prison. It always depends on location. Just visiting him in the 2 camps he was in was a huge difference. JIT camp he was always in fights, but when he got moved to an older camp he got in way less fights. My brother was an animal though, but I imagine, especially in the 2nd camp, there were tons of folk that never even fought. I'd gone there and there were people gardening, and just overall the mood was pretty chill. He's seen a pedophile attacked and sexually assaulted in his med wing. He's seen guts spilled from a chiv. Someone got bayflighted from getting knocked out. A few stories, but he was also volatile and was always drawn to that shit. Routine. The name of the game is pass the time. They can't show this really in movies, but Shawshank touched on it. If shit was accurate though, it'd be a million-hour movie showing nothing. All in all, it depends on where you did time and your personality. My brother, before he got out, desperately sent out letters for us to help because a guard burned and pissed on his family photos and letters. Threatened he'd go home deformed. But my brother was no picnic, so again, he drew that kind of attention. I won't say that your brother's lying, but what I will do is that I've screened a lot of letters leaving a prison with similar stories that never happened. Inmates will sometimes do it just to elicit an emotional response out of whoever he's writing, so they'll send him money. Sometimes they just want a letter back from someone who's concerned. I guess what throws me off the most about his stories are the kinds of prisons where guys get their guts spilled. Usually aren't the kinds of prisons where the infirmary allows access between inmates. Yeah, only problem is my mom and I both communicated a ton with him. There'd be no reason for him to elicit some response when we spoke weekly and wrote back every time and promptly. In a fun turn of events, once my brother was out, we ran into someone who was a co at the same prison, and this guy confirmed to me that sounds like something that particular co has done in the past. The infirmary story and shanking happened at 2 different prisons, same state. Prison guard here. It depends on the prison. Some prisons are good, some are less good. But there isn't going to be a first world prison where Shawshank is played out with American history X rape scenes taking place daily. Biased opinion, but guards aren't abusive assholes. Inmates aren't always tough. Child molesters aren't beaten up usually. Gang members are usually low-key because on a well-run unit they would be shipped off or sent to high security. Most guys are just watching their TV, reading a book, looking forward to visitation day, and waiting for their turn to go home. LWOP, Life W/O parole, are a different breed, but most are chill. Never been myself, but I have a good friend who did a 7-year bid in prison. Disclosure, he was a non-violent drug offender, so it was probably minimum or medium security. He said it's absolutely nothing like TV or movies at all. Biggest threat is unending, unrelenting boredom. Nobody really bothered anyone else. They just wanted to do their time and go home. No fights, no drama. People who have an end date tend to not do anything to jeopardize that. I can imagine it's much different in maximum security prisons, where you know you're in there for a very long time and just don't care about a few extra months for smashing someone's face in because they looked at you wrong. The guys with no foreseeable future and no hope just don't care. Prison is their life and they want to be top man. Same here. I went to a higher security prison than I was used to, and this big ass dude cut my hair when I first got there. Didn't say a word the whole time. I was new and nervous, so I'm sure I was giving off weird vibes. But I caught him reading Game of Thrones. I had seen most of the series up to that point, season 6, and he hadn't seen any of the series since he'd been down for about 8 years. I'd never read the books though and really needed a distraction. Turns out this massive scary looking black man was very into GOT. Like knew almost as much about the show as I did. Had made up rules, bought pieces, everything. An entire board game based on the GOT world. Read every magazine he could for updates. Very surreal. The prison guards in my experience were men and women who wished they were cops but weren't smart enough to be cops. This is fucking scary because I grew up with a lot of guys who became cops and some of them have very little intelligence. Also a lot of them, but not all of them, take that sort of job for some kind of power trip. Some of them genuinely got off on being terrible people. Also most of the contraband like drugs and cell phones were smuggled in by the guards themselves. A man who wants to be a prison guard is a scary person. There is something very wrong with that person in my opinion. IDK. Just my experience, but fuck prison guards. Prison guard here. Ouch. Most of us have no desire to be cops. The few that do generally don't last long because there is a major police shortage in America. We don't power trip inmates, just see us enforcing rules that we were told and turn out to enforce as trippin'. I've met a few asshole guards, but most of them won't last. We don't like people that wire you guys up either. Too much blame is placed on us for contraband in prisons, Don't act like some of the inmates don't have people throwing shit over fences or talking their own children into bringing shit in on visitation day. I'd love it if you liked and subscribed.